Remember last time we talked about the divisions of the field?
Right.
Right? And how you divide the field with regard to the identification of the corners of the field for payah. And then we talked about the unusual Mishnah in Machshirin about perspiration and water inside caves and houses. Now, our first Mishnah this week is going to be from Mishnah Shabbat. Okay, hang on 1 second. Let me close the door here. All right, so a couple things about Mishnah Shabbat. First of all, as you can see from the fact that it has 22 chapters. In fact, it has more than 22 chapters. Mishnah Shabbat is big. You might think that if the Masechet of Mishnah is so big, there must be a lot of scripture, Torah, to support that much, 22 chapters. For example, Machshirin has, fewer than 10. It's very, it's a quarter of the size. Payah, small. These are small things. Even Yom Kippur only has 8 chapters, Yoma. But Shabbat has, a lot of chapters, dozens. So the odd thing is there isn't a lot of scripture. In the Torah itself, there are very few verses that explicitly deal with Shabbat. And so much of the laws of Shabbat are Midrash halacha, are derived from, teased out of a small amount of actual text. In the Hebrew, in classical Hebrew phrasing, the rabbis say, Mikra me'at, a little bit of Mikra, of Torah scripture, of verses, halachot harbe, but many, many laws. Okay, so this law is nowhere explicitly in the Torah. You read the 5 books of Moses, the whole thing, 5 books of Moses, all the 613 laws, you won't really find the law of a broken jug, a broken clay container, and what you can and cannot do with a sort of food emergency on Shabbat. Because it's not in there. This is derived instead from a larger conceptual framework that's also in the Mishnah, in chapter 7 of Mishnah Shabbat. I've memorized that because of Dov Zlotnick, the teacher I referenced the other day. And there they lay out the full full structure of the prohibited labors on Shabbat. And we're going to see a derivation of rules for Shabbat that come from the larger categories of labor that are prohibited on Shabbat. Okay, so that's our topic, is categories of things that are prohibited on Shabbat. And you're going to see that it's a very specific kind of question about a very specific instance. But again, my concern when we study these is less that we know the specific content of this Mishnah, because it probably won't really apply to us in our average, everyday Shabbat life. But instead that we train our minds to think like Mishnah scholars and like people who take their spiritual life seriously and want to analyze it, push it, grow in our understanding by being able to push the envelope of understanding. That's really my goal. Okay, chabit shenishbara, a cask that broke, right? Picture like one of those old Phoenician jug kind of things. Something gets a crack and it's leaking. Are you allowed to gather up and fix stuff and separate out the produce that's falling out? The owner, we're told, can save from the broken cask that's leaking. Sufficient may be saved to serve 3 meals. Why only 3 meals?
Breakfast, lunch, and supper.
Enough meals for to finish out Shabbat?
Correct. It's enough meals for Shabbat. You're obligated to have 3 meals on Shabbat. It's not just a choice and a wonderful thing to do. You're supposed to have 3 distinct meals, 3 opportunities for oneg and enjoyment on Shabbat. So if this might actually jeopardize that and prohibit you from observing that mitzvah. But beyond those 3, you don't really have a Shabbat interest in saving whatever it is that's leaking out of this cask. You have just the personal financial interest, like, I don't want to lose the rest of the water or the rest of the olive oil. We're probably talking about something more like olive oil or wine. Something that you would have, but that losing it would not be, wouldn't bankrupt you. In addition to that, what you can save for yourself, the owner can call others. In other words, you can be generous. You can give it away to others who will also use it on Shabbat. Certain things are permitted on Shabbat for the purpose of Shabbat. I mean, you can't do them for the purpose of anything else, but if you're doing them just to keep Shabbat, then you can do them. This is one of those examples. Provided always that no portion be soaked up with a sponge. Why? Why no sponge?
Squeeze it.
Right, sponging something up is one of those labors that it's not a major category of labor, it's a minor category of labor. It derives from changing the shape of certain things, right? When you soak something up, in other words, you're changing the nature of things. Part of the overall philosophical restriction of Shabbat is leave the world the way it is. 6 days you labor and change the world. Make music, industry, art. You go to school, you go to work, spend money, you buy something, you move it from this place to that place, you dig a hole, you plant a row of corn, you harvest, you sow. All those things in some way change some aspect of the way the world is. The way the world is in this scenario is there's leaking oil. Once it's fallen on the floor, you can't sponge it up. You can hold a bowl underneath it and take away, separate out a certain amount for use on Shabbat, and anyone else who you know can do that too. In other words here, the issue really is a technical one. Separating out and saving the produce is not the issue that's being permitted or prohibited. The thing that's being prohibited is using a sponge. That's the technicality. Everything else, it seems, basically, is permissible. you can do something here, so long as you do not cross a technical line. And that's for better and for worse, I will say, a significant aspect of traditional Shabbat is that it involves technicalities. Technicalities just mean very specific application of the law. So if the law is don't change things or don't sew, no sewing, then the question becomes, what's sewing? Shabbat itself is about industry and technique and technology. The things you're not allowed to do, the tools you're not allowed to use to alter the world around you. A shovel, scissors, knitting needles, sewing needle. What if I only stitch one loop? Is that sewing? If I'm not allowed to write, but I make a mark on the page that isn't a letter, or there's only one letter, since in Hebrew there are no one-letter words. Is that writing, and therefore prohibited, or not? Where is that technological line? Always very concerned about that, because that's kind of, how far, how much constitutes a violation of Shabbat. Now, we're going to explore another aspect of liquids on Shabbat. One must not squeeze fruits so as to extract the juice, right? No fresh squeezed orange juice. Picture those machines, right, that squeeze. You can't do that on Shabbat. You can eat an orange, but one must not squeeze fruit for the purpose of extracting the juice. If it oozes out by itself, it is forbidden to use it. So if you cut the orange in half and just sort of hold it there and it drips out, no, you can't do that either. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the fruits are for eating, the juice which oozes out is permitted for use. Well, that makes sense, because it's kind of ludicrous to suggest you could eat an orange, but not drink the juice that's produced by eating the orange. That would be impossible.
Wow.
If it's a juice orange, then you can't do it. Now he's going to give another analogy. If honey cakes have been broken on Shabbat Eve, what's honey cakes here?
Honeycomb?
They mean honeycomb, correct.
Okay.
So if you have honeycomb, the honey generally is not falling out of it. It stays in there. And you have to, if you want the honey, you have to break it. If you broke the honeycomb after Shabbat began and honey oozes out, you can't use it, because it's you broke it.
What about if you dropped it and it broke?
Well, you see here that there is a dispute between the Chachamim here, or the anonymous sage here, or it's possibly Rabbi Yehuda, since he had that previous statement about fruit. And really, they're making an analogy between fruit and honeycomb. Here's a thing that has a container, a natural container, whose insides are wet and liquid. And what are the rules? And you can see that there emerges here a stringent point of view, deeply rooted in the technical. It doesn't matter if things don't make sense or if it seems like it's extreme. If it crosses a technical line and produces, liquid, juices something, you can't use it on Shabbos. Juicing is not allowed. So you can't drink the juice of something that's not allowed. After Shabbos is over, you can use it. And that's why the beginning is kind of interesting, right? There is, we have the difference here between a natural container, like the peel of a fruit or something, and an artificial container, and honeycomb, which is natural, but not like all other fruits. So there's actually a lot of technicality in this one Mishnah. And you'll notice what's remarkably absent from the end of this Mishnah. What should you do? They don't really seem all that concerned with solving the unanswered questions like, well, can I or can't I? He permits it, he doesn't, is it or isn't it? It's, they seem to be more concerned with laying out the basic issue. They want you to analyze the issue, to take it out of your personal experience and try to develop an overarching Shabbat, technical manual.
I thought that there was a specific list of you can do this, but you can't do that. So for example, if I was in my house inside an area that had an A roof, could I pick up that broken cask and put it in a larger basin so that the liquid wouldn't run away and would leak out? But this is saying I can't touch it on Shabbat. I can't touch that liquid on Shabbat, but after sundown I can have it.
There are a number of things that if you do them on Shabbat, the fruit of doing them is only prohibited for you for the remainder of Shabbat and a small, and that amount of time more after Shabbat. Like, it's just to remove the incentive. It's not to waste the product. So if I cooked something on Shabbat, let's say an hour before Shabbat ended, right? I can't eat that until Shabbat is over, plus an hour. Like penalty, it's like a penalty lap in races. In other words, it's not meant to, destroy your industry. It's meant to disincentivize.
I don't understand the cooking example because you're not supposed to cook an hour before Shabbat's over anyway.
They mean it's like done unintentionally, or somebody did it for you, or it's food that was cooked on Shabbat. I used to have this problem all the time with break fast on Yom Kippur. I'll just say, at Chata'ai Ani Maskir, I'm admitting my sinfulness, okay? I used to be a lot more concerned about all that stuff. And I actually took seriously the notion that if you cooked the food on Yom Kippur, I could not eat it until a decent amount of time after Yom Kippur. And I knew they were cooking food. I just knew it. I mean, it wasn't like I did investigations or anything. And there were a couple of people who routinely invited me and our family over to break fast, and they had a lot of people from Shul over there. It was one of the big local gatherings that I could get to quickly and eat afterwards. So I was like, okay, this is great. Like it was a regular place that we broke the fast. But I had to be careful what I ate because I couldn't eat any cooked food. So I could have a bagel because the bagel was made before Shabbos. I could have, onion and tomato and cucumber and salads and things that weren't cooked. But kugels and things that were cooked on Shabbat to break the fast, I didn't eat. I also never brought it up. Right? Like my goal was not to embarrass them or to make them feel bad about it. But I knew that they were preparing food on Shabbat. So or on Yom Kippur, and sometimes it would be on Shabbat too. Like and honestly, sometimes I would just eat it, even if I knew, because you're going to embarrass your host. Your host invites you over, and it's Shabbos, and they are still cooking the food that they made special for you. I'm going to say no. I'm not going to eat your food. I mean that's.
Does it matter if it's cooked by a non-Jewish person in a non-kosher kitchen?
Well, first, let me just say that if my mother ever caught me doing a thing like that, she would be furious. I mean, it would be like so completely unacceptable. You what? You didn't eat that meal? Like, there's no way. I mean, I just raised very differently to understand that. Barbara, the answer is a little bit complicated. Hang on, let me stop that for a second. The answer is a little bit complicated in that you're asking the question about what's usually called a Shabbos goy, right? A non-Jewish person who does something for you on Shabbat. There's a few very important basic things, and I'm glad you brought it up because I always like to teach about this because it is one of the most profoundly misunderstood things, most commonly misunderstood things, and it leads to all kinds of misunderstanding between peoples. And it is our great mission to bring peace amongst peoples and understanding and harmony and unite the human family in that way. I mean, this is one of those things that gets in our way as Jews. So it's a widespread misunderstanding that you are allowed to ask a non-Jewish person to do something for you on Shabbat that you are not allowed to do. You are not allowed to do that. And you're not allowed to fake it and fake around it. Oh boy, I sure wish this, steak would cook itself for me. No, that is called asking somebody to do it for you. God knows the difference. I know the difference. You know the difference. We all know the difference. The reason you're not allowed to do that is a very simple idea that it affects so many aspects of Jewish life and halacha. And that is a person's agent is like them. If I send somebody as my agent to do something for me, I am doing it. Otherwise, I could hire a hitman. I could hire false witnesses. I could ask people to do things for me that are totally asur, or steal something for me. I mean, like anything. No. And by the way, that means that anybody you do hire, right? You are doing that thing. You hire a butcher. You are responsible for what that butcher does with the money that by being hired by you. You're responsible for your agents, and their actions are your actions. You're not morally superior by distancing yourself from something you don't like. No. And you're not allowed to ask somebody to do something you're not allowed to do. Here's what you are allowed to do. You have two leniencies. That's the stringency. Because our shaliach, our agent, is us. You can't cook because it's like me cooking. at least not if he's cooking for me. There's two exceptions to that. One is things which non-Jews do for themselves. Or, right? So, when I go to my in-laws, if I'm at my in-laws who are not Jewish for Shabbat, and they make coffee for themselves, can I have some coffee? Yeah, I can have coffee. If they know that I like coffee and they make a little more coffee than they normally make, can I have coffee?
No.
No, yeah, I can have that coffee because they make the coffee. They made a little more. They didn't really make the coffee for me. They're not cooking water more than if they were cooking water before. They're still making it for themselves. If they don't drink coffee ever, and they just decide to do something nice for me, I would never ask. If they said, would you like me to make it for you? I would say no. But they were just like, we made coffee. And I don't ask, don't you not drink coffee, right? Okay, I can drink it. There's a leniency there, right? They are not really doing anything for me. And I have not asked them to do anything in any way. The other one is more common, and that is people who work for you on an ongoing basis, who do stuff for you like this on Tuesday or Wednesday, or this is the thing that they do, like our police officer, like the maintenance people in the building. They always turn on the lights. So if they come in and turn on the lights, they do that on Tuesday. It's not exceptional for them. They're not doing it for us because we are prohibited from doing it. They do it because that's the broader general arrangement of working for a shul where people do those kinds of things all the time. But, it wasn't done. It wasn't prepared right. Something didn't happen. That whole notion that you could just pull some non-Jew off the street and say, would you turn that light on for me? No. Shaliach Adam Kimoto. A person's agent is like them.
I have a problem with the whole coffee thing.
Not the coffee thing.
Not
Okay.
that I have a problem with coffee, mind you.
Okay, that's good.
I have a problem without coffee. They know you like coffee. So there's an implication that they are making it for you. You haven't overtly asked them, but they know you want it because they know you and they know you like coffee in the morning. But it's okay because you haven't specifically asked them. I mean, I know we're splitting hairs here.
Right. Okay. So let's split the hairs a little more. Okay. I'm gonna accept the challenge. Okay? No. Here, because you're raising. You would be like with Rabbi Elazar, you'd be with the Chachamim, who's like, I can sniff a technical loophole, as well as the next person. But here's another example that is often happens. You're staying at a hotel, okay, and they have breakfast, cooked food, made on Shabbat for sure, warmed at least. And let's say you don't eat the cooked food, but you would drink the coffee. So they've made coffee. They make coffee every day. They make coffee on Saturday. We can assume that it's not a Jewish person making the coffee, right? Because we live in a majority non-Jewish country. If you were in Israel, you would have to know that was true, since it's a majority Jewish country. But here we can assume not so much. So by you staying, if the hotel is empty and only 2 or 3 people there, they'll make less coffee.
Right.
Only makes sense, right? They make an amount of coffee based on the number of people who are registered at the hotel. So by your registering there, haven't you made them make more coffee?
Yes.
So you wouldn't drink that coffee.
Well,
Well,
I drink anybody's coffee.
I mean, with your Mishnah hat on, you know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I would not. I
Yeah,
would not.
Or you
Because
could make an argument. You could make an argument that that coffee was made for you.
yes,
It's
that,
not
that,
in, yeah.
that
it's
I
not
didn't
incidental.
explicitly ask, but I implicitly asked,
Mhm.
as you did by staying with your in-laws on Shabbos.
Right. I guess, yeah, that is, you certainly could make that case, and you would be on relatively solid ground, I think, at least with the support of, you know, some of the Deot in this Mishnah. Yeah, Mickey.
Um,
Do you want to argue? Do you want to argue with Cindy?
I'm gonna drink the coffee. No, I'm not gonna argue about the coffee. This is another instance that years ago when we used to go to General Assembly meetings and people from all walks of Judaism were there. They had special elevators that stopped on every floor. And they were allowed to get onto the elevator. They didn't ask anybody to push the button. They didn't. I mean, it would be almost like riding in a car with somebody.
Right. Well, you have not done anything. You just took 2 steps in and you took 2 steps out. The elevator is automatic. It's running. It's like an escalator. It's going. It's like lights. If the lights are on in the room, can't you make use of? You can read in that room, right? You're allowed to use the lights.
As long as you didn't turn it on.
Right, they're already on. So as long as you don't turn them on or do something like that, or what about if they're automatic though? Right, like when you walk into the room, the lights turn on.
It's like opening the refrigerator with the light.
Yeah. Or electric doors. You know, you live in an apartment building that has a little, you know, motion detector opener.
Well, of course, those things didn't exist when the Mishnah was written. And I guess that's an excuse for a lot of things.
Right.
But I would see people just waiting for the elevator. And if it happened to open and they happened to go either up or down, it was okay.
Okay, so I got a story to share.
Okay.
Okay, this is a true story of in my first year of rabbinical school. So this is 1988, maybe 89, 88. No, it was 88. My first year of rabbinical school. So I'm like a Marine, right? You know, new recruit. I'm all gung ho. Any stringency I could possibly keep, I'm ready to bring it, you know, bring it all on, right? I want it all. Okay. So I'm going to my college homecoming weekend. It's the first one since I've graduated that I'm going to. And all our friends are going to be there. They're all staying at the same hotel and we're all like, you know, hanging out together for the weekend. Great. Except it's, you know, it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So there's some stuff Friday before Shabbos and it's Brandeis. So it's, you know, they're sensitive to Shabbos. So there's like a minyan at the hotel and there's, you know, there's things around to be Jewish there. But the hotel is a couple exits up on the highway from campus because there's nowhere to stay otherwise. So we're all staying in a place that requires you to get on a shuttle bus to get to campus, which is where everything is happening and all the people are. So what do? So I go to my professor, Rabbi Joel Roth, who was one of my first year professors, was the dean of the rabbinical school at the time. He accepted me into rabbinical school and you know, he's a trusted mentor and a halachic authority at the seminary. And I said, here's my situation, right? And I said, it's like a Shabbos elevator, basically, right? It was his answer. He said, look, so long as it's a regular stop, meaning the shuttle bus is coming to the hotel, to take people from the hotel. That's where everybody's staying. So it's a regular stop, and it's stopping on campus, right? It's not coming and going for you or making any special stops for you. When you get there, they open the door where you get on. When they get there, they open the door, you get off. You're not driving. You can assume the driver isn't Jewish, and don't ask him, right? And so yeah, if you do that, that would be okay. And then he says to me, but I sure would hate to try to have to explain it to anybody. Because unless you have this whole conversation, which we just had, and you see me doing that, yeah, you're going to think that guy is, riding a bus on Shabbos.
But isn't there some violation in there about, like, there's something in my mind about if it, and this doesn't have to do with Shabbos, this has to do with sitting in synagogue with my mother on Pesach, okay? And she wouldn't let us eat Passover candy in shul on Passover, because it could give the impression that perhaps we were eating something
Right.
unkosher. So isn't that the same thing, that like, even though what you were technically doing was okay, it could give the impression to somebody that it wasn't.
Right. So the Hebrew phrase that you're referencing is marit ayin. Maris ayin. The what the eye sees.
Okay.
Right. And it's basically a category of law about perception, that there is sort of a expectation. I will say it's very difficult to nail down circumstances, but there's a notion that one should not do things in public that could easily be misunderstood as not allowed, and especially if in a place where people know you, and if you are a respected person there who everyone, the assumption is everybody keeps the law, right? So if I see you eating a hot dog next to a hot dog cart, right, I'm going to assume you got the hot dog at that cart, not that you brought it with you. So even if you brought a hot dog with you, you shouldn't eat it, in public where it looks like you just got it from the corner guy selling hot dogs. By the way, that happened to me. That's a true story. I was working at Camp Ramah in Wisconsin, and which is far, far away from this little town called Eagle River in Wisconsin. It's a great little town, really, really nice. And coolest of all cools, there's a little health food shop in Eagle River, Wisconsin, where you can get health food, which, believe me, working at summer camp, you need to make a run into Eagle River every now and then. And this guy who runs the health food shop also runs a hot dog stand in town, right on the main drag of town, where he sells veggie dogs. Also, steamed separately, like in a microwave. They're not cooked with the other dogs. He has vegetarians in mind. And so when I would go into town, I would often stop at his little place and order 2 veggie dogs for lunch. Fantastic. One day I get back to camp, and some staff member, I'll call him a little punk, because that's kind of how I perceived it at the time. He comes up to me and says, "I saw you eating non-kosher food." And even at the time, I was vegetarian, and I was vocal about being vegetarian. He said, "I saw you eating meat." I was like, "You little punk, you think you saw me eating meat," right? And we had this whole little discussion amongst the rabbis and rabbinical students about, should I have done that? There's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with what I ate, for sure. But should I have done it? And here's a real life case where someone actually saw me and had the wrong impression. And what if he hadn't come up and been like so, insolent with me? But he had just said, "Rabbi Norry says he's a veggie, but I saw him eat a hot dog." Some people would believe him. Some people would be like, dude, you're dreaming. But other people would believe him, right? So that does place a certain burden on me. Here's the balance, though. And I think this is a compelling balance because I think, shy of really doing something that people could really misunderstand, people have an obligation to judge you favorably, especially if they know you. Dan lekol adam lekaf zchut. You have to judge people towards the scale, which is their merit. If you see me eating something in public, you should assume it's kosher until you have good reason to believe that it's not. If you see Guy Fieri in public eating something, you can assume that it's not, right? Until you know better. Don't judge people unfavorably when you have no good reason to judge them in that particular way. In fact, you have an obligation. What this kid had was an obligation that he didn't know about. A, to honor rabbis. He should know better. And if he thinks I did it, he should approach me with the utmost humility, lower his head and say, Rabbi, I think I saw something and I just need to clear it with you. That's it. I'm not unapproachable or unimpugnable, but, I have some stripes on my belt. You don't have those stripes. You better be careful how you approach me. Secondly, he just didn't know that he should judge people favorably. And I mean in all circumstances.
So are you saying my mother was wrong?
You could have had the candy. See? Mickey was
all those years I could have had the candy.
Mickey's gonna drink the coffee. You could have had the candy. Yeah.
I'm so glad we had this talk.
I will say this, to your mother's credit, she probably knew that people are a little bit nuts about Passover, right? Like they get all bent up. They might think, making the whole synagogue not kosher, it's cooties. They think chametz is cooties and it could infect the synagogue. People get real bent out of shape about Passover.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. No, Thanks for flushing that out.
No, that's all good. Can we do one more? I have that it's one, but I want to do one more, and it's not anything like this. It's just a descriptive one. So I want to do this one too. Okay, we can see that, yeah? Mishnah Yoma. Yoma meaning Yom Kippur, the day. Mishnah Yoma deals with the rituals in biblical and temple times in the days of when the temple stood. And then the last chapter deals with fasting and the afflictions that we put on ourselves. Actually, I think we're going to study that particular one in just a little bit. And you'll notice this begins with the letter Taf, which means this is our 9th Mishnah. We've already studied 8 Mishnayot. That's amazing. Okay, here's our 9th. And it describes one of the rituals on Yom Kippur. The priest, the high priest, the priest who holds the urn, rather, has a clay jug, and he shakes it, right? This is a lottery, if you remember. So it's like, shaking the dice. And he brings up the 2 lots, the 2 pieces. On one was inscribed, and the Hebrew here is, Echad katuv alav Lashem. That's the word that was written on it, to the name. Ve'echad katuv alav le'azazel, to Azazel, the desert. Okay, so those are the two things. He pulls out one. If it says Lashem, he pulls out the other. It says La'azazel. The deputy high priest. This is the second to the highest person. Then the deputy high priest was at his right hand, standing over here, and the head of the ministering family at his left. These are parts of the hierarchy of the upper priesthood. Just for easy analogy, think about the Pope and the most senior bishop and the head of Vatican City. Right? These are high. These are the top three people. If the lot that said Lashem came up in his right hand, the deputy high priest who's standing at his right hand would read the lot, and he would say to him, "Sir, high priest, raise your right hand." And if the lot for the name came up in the left hand, the hand of the ministering family would say, "Sir, high priest, raise your left hand." In other words, this is a way of, he doesn't read the two lots, he's neutral. He reaches in his hands, he draws them out, and whichever, the two people read them, whichever one says Lashem, that one, they tell him to raise his hand. And that's the hand that he raises. Then he placed them on the two goats. We read this passage from the Torah about the two goats who will be the vehicles for the confession of sin. The idea here is that there's a non-human force guiding the hand of the high priest onto one of these two goats. Because two different things are going to happen to these two different goats. He places them on the two goats and says, "A sin offering for the Lord." Rabbi Ishmael said he did not need to say a sin offering, chatat, the word chet, chatat, a sin offering, just, Lashem, to God. And they answered after him, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. So he says, Chatat Ladonai. This one is the sin offering, and it will go to God. And that's the goat that gets burned up on the altar completely, 100%, all a smoke offering, burned to ashes on the altar. And the other one, La'azazel, is guided out and sent into the desert. One is atonement for the sin. The other is vehicle for all of our sins to be taken far, far away from us out into the desert to be, lost back in. And once that's done, all the rest of the people who are gathered at this ritual ceremony say this line, which we know, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. We bless God's holy, glorious name forever and ever. It's an acknowledgement that this was, guided by God's hand. The correct goat went to the correct place, and the ritual atonement will be effective. A lot of stuff hinged on this moment. This is the moment of national atonement as described in the Torah itself, and the Mishnah extracts that and lays it out in more detailed script form, almost as if they're describing what they saw, not what should happen. Notice the language. The priest shook the urn. not he will shake the urn or he should shake the urn. And he pulled out too. In other words, they're describing something which they have seen in language that implies this is what was done. This is what they do. Any questions about that? It's relatively straightforward. And you see, this is just a completely different kind of Mishnah. It's non-halachic. There's no do this, don't do that. This is a asur, prohibited. This is mutar, permitted. There's no, there's really no stringency or leniency. The only disagreement is Rabbi Ishmael said he didn't need to say chatat. In other words, maybe there were some high priest did it one way, maybe sometimes he saw it that way, or he was just like, well, he could say it, but he doesn't need to. But other than that, there's no dispute. Yeah, Barbara.
You described the selection as being made by a non-human source. Is it God making the selection?
Well, it's, is anything random? Is anything arbitrary, right? The shaking of the urn. To put it right, it's free will. It's choice, right? He could have reached his hands indifferently. He could have shaken it fewer times. All true. But ultimately, it takes human knowledge out of it, right? Choice, yes, but knowledge, no. We have no knowledge of this. It's meant to convey that it's random, right? And but it does seem to matter, right? You can't just say, you have to draw lots. You have to go through this ceremony. You have to divine something through this method.
But it's very popular to say, oh, that's God's will. For whatever. When I lost at a dice game,
well,
that was God's will.
Well, so God does not pick the goat here, right? It does involve human agency. In other words, as does dice, right? A machine doesn't roll the dice. The wind doesn't roll the dice. You roll the dice. There's the agency. You pick the dice up, you roll them. He reaches
I go
his
to
hand
Georgia and I buy a lottery ticket and I let the machine pick the numbers. Then I didn't do anything.
That's
That's
correct.
God's will that I lost.
Can you argue with that? Can you say
Yeah,
that it's not?
God's supposed to love me. He's not supposed to make me lose all the time. Now I lost 2 games in a row, the dice and the lottery.
There's a lot of assumptions there. But the fact that you could have a theology, it is perfectly logical theology to say everything that happens is God's will. How could it be otherwise? If it was not God's will, it cannot happen.
Exactly.
Nothing happens against God's will.
Because she is all powerful.
Well, then the question is God's will compulsive? Right? Is it controlling? Does it eliminate personal choice? For the rabbis, that is the balancing statement. In fact, in Mishnah Avot, I can't remember who it is that says it. He says, "Hakol tzafui v'harishut netuna." Everything is seen, is known, but will is given to you. In other words, this is how I like to think about it. You could kill, could put the knife to the throat, but until you do, you haven't. God did not do that. God is not moving your hand. You have the choice to do that, but God knows what you're going to do. But if God knows what I'm going to do, then it's not choice, it's predetermined. So that's the unique nature of God. is God is not restricted by the laws of probability and statistics as we are. Our minds are finite. They cannot see beyond the two possibilities, heads or tails, to know which one it's going to be. Every single time it will be 50-50 for us. God does not see history and time that way. Time does not flow only in one direction for God. So it's not Western or conventional to think it, but it is possible to think that both things are true. That all things are the known will of God. God knew all things from the very beginning. How could it be otherwise? God, after all, spoke the original sound, knew the reverberations, created the tympanum on which all those vibrations would happen. So to suggest that God does not know that is kind of doesn't make sense. Here's where you run into trouble with terrible things. Right? Well, if that's true, then that horrible thing that happened is God's will. And I don't mean like cancer. I mean like violent, terrible, horrible, awful, right? Like preventable, not like death. Death is not evil. But, I don't need to describe evil. You know what I'm talking about. So that's God's will, really? Those things?
So you're
Yes.
saying God has knowledge but no control.
Right. Well, Brad Artson has a great little way of summing this up. He's like, you can't have all three. You can't have all knowing, all good, and all powerful. You can't have all three. And I think, though, we like to think of God as all powerful, all good, all knowing, but those are kind of very limiting descriptions. You can't really say stuff like that about God. Doesn't mean God is all knowing. We don't even know what that means. I think, I appreciate Brad's point because, look around, right? The bottom line is God's world isn't all good. Badness is inherent in the system. How about that? I know because it's in me. I'm part of the system, right? Polarities are a part of the system. Just Genesis lays that out. So that I think is, again, the rabbis express that both of those polarities, the yin and the yang, there will be a time for every purpose under heaven, a time for mourning. That is a part of the purpose. A time for war and a time for peace. So I think this ritual in Yoma describes this remarkable partnership that we have, where our free action is part of God's atoning power. We have to draw those out. We have to place them here. We have to visualize one goat going the other way and the other seeking atonement upwards. But it's not, well, whichever one, it doesn't matter. Somehow it matters. Somehow that part, the random number generator part of it, which I'll just say this. I think that is, my understanding is that it's pretty much impossible for humans to generate random numbers, to imitate chance. We can't seem to do it because we only flow in one direction. We always set up the system. So we always know something about the system. It'll never truly be random. We can make it there where we didn't know, but somehow someone somewhere can know and will have known what they, you know. So generating a random number is very hard. That's why they do the ping pong balls. Because that's instead of a computer just, you know, running through it, because we can't really design that. Ping pong balls, it's like leaves from a tree. Which leaf is going to hit the ground first? If I could possess all the knowledge necessary to know, I could know. But I cannot. I know. Any other questions?